was published in the fall of '64, and by the way, the timing of that is somewhat suspect too, is it not? Yes, because what happened in November after it was published in '64? The election, and a murder in Texas had made a Texan president, and so were they rushed to judgment? Did they rush it? To some extent they did. But there's a famous book called Rush to Judgment by a lawyer named Mark Lane, who purported to be the representative of the Oswald family and his posthumous lawyer, if you would, who purported to be that. He was not, because you can't represent a dead man. But he wrote this book arguing that things were rushed. I don't think his theses are exactly correct, but there were some things that came up, and that's one of the questions that's answered in this book, or partially answered, and that was the riddles of this last trip Oswald took, of all his peripatetic traveling to the Soviet Union, trying to go to Cuba, doing this, he's in Europe for a while, back and forth between New Orleans and Dallas, went to New York as a little kid, and lived there part of the time in New York City. And it's a strange, strange itinerary into the Marines at age 17. Crazy mother, absolutely crazy. And of course, in all this, you see, we find out an awful lot about Oswald, but maybe we never really got a picture of who he was and why he did what he did. Maybe that's impossible. The Warren Commission tried, it did its best, I think. But he's arguing that that last trip to Mexico may be the key and the riddle of the whole thing, because of some evidence that turned up in the Church Committee investigating CIA assassination plots. And that would have been the famous picture of the, quote, man who wasn't Oswald. You've heard of that? We'll get to him in just a minute, I hope. I slapped these things together. I was afraid of my life when the storm was hitting last Sunday. I was over in the home working on slides when I thought a freight train went over the top of our house. Elaine was driving back last Sunday to get over here in time because we were by home when we lived in both towns. The most famous documentary evidence the Warren Commission had to deal with was the Zapruder film. Forward. And of course, there's Elaine in 1980, 75, I don't know exactly what we did. The year I taught in Texas for a couple of years in the mid-70s, and we were little, and so we were there. So that's the prima facie evidence about the Kennedy assassination. It's been a subject of controversy ever since. And let's get to some of the things that people have puzzled about the Zapruder film before we go too much further. It isn't that hard a shot. People who visited the Dealey Plaza, how many here have done it? Practically half, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Actually, it's a fairly compact space, isn't it? And it's a doable shot. Those arguments don't make any sense anyway, because the gunman only has to be accurate once. He doesn't have to be accurate every day. Did Oswald have the skills to do it? Well, of course he did. He's been a Marine marksman. He could have done it under the right circumstances. Forward. And then, of course, there's always the question, why, if there was a gunman there, why didn't he shoot from that place with the bush? The famous grassy knoll with the picket fence on top of it. All sorts of mythologies developed about that day. Maybe it's true, but what we do know is there's nothing concrete. People's recollections, their memories. I saw a puff of smoke from the picket fence. Well, when you get into a court of law, eyewitness testimony can send people to the electric chair, it's true. But it may not be the best evidence in any case. I mean, have you ever heard the old expression, the man lies like an eyewitness? It's a tendency, I think, for people who are eyewitnesses to see things that weren't there. An old drill for people in legal training has them sit in a room with several, and they'll see a common same event, and then they'll describe it. There are always variations. Always. People see an event, especially in something that's surprising and not expecting, and ask, remember the story of Rashomon, the Japanese folk tale, about a crime that 3 people witnessed? They have 3 entirely different interpretations. They're not lying. They're eyewitnesses, but they saw different things. To some extent, that explains a lot of variations in this. Fast forward. I mean, it would be in some respects a much better shot, and to this day there are still people contending there was a gunman on the grassy knoll. But remember now, there were 2 investigations. One was the Warren Commission, and the other one came after all this fuss about in the 1970s. This report was being released in the late 1970s of the House Special Committee on Assassinations. So what we have is the Warren Commission making its report, looking at all this evidence about these places forward. And the way people reacted, the Warren Commission simply said it was a natural echo chamber. People couldn't tell where shots were coming forward. And there was this fence, which was an ideal place to shoot from. Lane doesn't look too happy there. I always like to wish you would. I like to show that slide as often as possible. So. Forward. And of course, there was a man in that tower back there who claims he saw people being dropped off, saw people with guns and so forth. He wound up suspiciously dead shortly after. But anyway, so we had people claiming, but nothing concrete other than people saying, I saw something. People saw Secret Servicemen with badges. The Warren Commission said no Secret Servicemen were assigned to Dealey Plaza on the ground. They were all with the motorcade. And that's true, but doesn't prove there weren't people with Secret Service identification up on that grassy knoll shooing people away. Forward. Like I say, there's an awful lot of attention to it. People thought it was coming. Forward. And there was a guy standing in that pedestal over there. See, they're just past the Simmons Freeway sign. That's Abraham Zapruder and his secretary, Marilyn Sithman, who are taking this famous little 8mm Super 8 color movie called the Zapruder film. They thought a shot came from behind and to the right, i.e. the grassy knoll picket fence. But again, nothing much can be proven. Forward. Forward. Keep going. And so, well, I'm saying right now that there's nothing very concrete. And the Warren Commission did not say there was no conspiracy. It didn't say it. It said we can't find any evidence of a conspiracy. The second investigation, the House Special Committee on Assassination, which met in the mid-1970s, its final report was released in '79, said there probably was a conspiracy, and said there were probably 2 gunmen, and there wasn't 3 shots that were fired. Why did the Warren Commission think there were 3 shots? Because that's all the cartridges they found on the 6th floor of the Texas School of Depository. How many have gone to see that museum in the depository? It's a pretty good museum. I thought it was professional. Well done. Forward. So much of us focused on this guy, who he was. Who was Lee Harvey Oswald? And maybe that's the wrong question. The real question was one the Warren Commission never had a very good handle on, and that was the idea of who might have been motivating him to do this. They couldn't find anybody, so they assumed he was entirely self-motivated. But he does have the strangest history. Or goes to Russia as a getting out of the Marine Corps. By the way, some people thought he was trying to assassinate John Connally. He was riding in front of Kennedy that day, governor of Texas, because Kennedy had appointed him Secretary of the Navy, and after Oswald got out of the Marine Corps, governed by the Navy, the Marine Corps changed his discharge from the Marine Corps after he defected to the Soviet Union as a civilian now, mind you, because he'd already served his time in the Marines. They, after the fact, changed it to a dishonorable discharge. And he wrote a letter to John Connally trying to get this changed. In fact, engaged a lawyer in New Orleans while he was living there at one of his living stints in New Orleans to get his honorable discharge reinstated. And so Marina said that he told her he was going to try to kill John Connally because he was mad about his discharge. Goes to Russia, picks up a very pretty Russian girl as his wife, forward, and comes after finding the Soviet Union was no workers' paradise, asks to get back in, and the United States takes him back, gives him a loan to come back. Everything to do with this stint in Russia is mysterious and sort of strange, and a lot of it has never been answered. A lot of people delve into it, But it faces the same problem that our own records as they are released, and some are going to be released in 2017. There is a law Congress passed to release these documents of the federal agencies that had something to do with this. I think the last batch were scheduled to be released in 2037, if I'm not bad. And so there is a records review board dedicated just to these issues of Kennedy assassination documents. And bit by bit, as they deem them safe to be released to the public, they are releasing them. And they dribble out. And how long it's going to take them all to come out, nobody. So don't ask me to do any research on that stuff. My theory is if there were anything that was really damaging, it would long since have been destroyed. So you're not going to find anything there any more than Norman Mailer, the famous novelist, writer, the New Journalism, when he spent 6 months in Russia investigating Oswald's records the KGB had released, any more than he could find anything. Because these kinds of documents are going to be clean. So it's not much likely we're going to learn anything more in the future, I think, from this forward. Well, so he gets back to the United States, and there he is forward again with a daughter, and he has another daughter, and he falls in with some very strange people, and here it gets interesting. Anybody know who this is? George de Montchil. Who is he? That's the way it saves my voice. He's a white Russian. What's a white Russian? Obviously not a Negro Russian, right? Simplistic, yeah. He was an anti-communist Russian dating back to the early 20th century. There is a large white Russian community living in Dallas. And George de Montchil and his wife took the Oswalds under their wing. I mean, why not? She's a pretty young woman. She doesn't speak any English because Lee won't let her learn English. That way he keeps her under control if she can't speak English. And he could be just attracted to her as an attractive young woman. That's not unheard of. And but others have pointed out he has this strange and kind of freaky background, and apparently, according to some recent stories that have been released, he does come through as he was a CIA agent. Was he Oswald's handler? Would a guy like Oswald even know he was being handled? There's no way to know. He was not the brightest bulb in the tree. Although he wasn't stupid, he did teach himself Russian well enough to speak it fairly fluently, and not perfectly, but he's self-taught. While he was an enlisted Marine, I mean, that's really rare. You know anything about the Marines? I spent 3.5 years on a Marine Corps air station where this one over here was born in 1961. And during that 3 years, I had a lot to do with Marine. We were the only Navy squadron on that base. All the rest were Marines. You don't find many enlisted Marines who are smart enough or interested enough to teach themselves Russian. You just don't. Okay, forward. So it looks like he was an FBI. And then here's Oswald laying trails, involved in radical activities that were public. It got him arrested. I mean, there's a book by a man named Edward J. Epstein, who wrote a really good doctoral dissertation, actually it was a master's thesis, on the Warren Commission called Inquest. I used to have my students read a master's thesis when they took this, about how the Warren Commission went about gathering its work. It was one of the first things published. And Epstein argued, the subtitle of the book was The Warren Commission and the Establishment of Truth. What is truth? Well, anyway, he subsequently wrote a book called Legend, in which he used spycraft and intelligence theories to point out that agents always have a history that's created for them. A legend, it's called. So here he is creating a legend as an anti-Castro activist. Or is he a pro-Castro activist? He seemed to be on both sides of these questions. Forward. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of stuff people like to write about how Oswald's picture looks different. Maybe he's changed. Finally, it gets so bad they dig his corpse up. Really? They dug him up years later to make sure he really was Oswald. And you know how they proved he was really Oswald? The corpse revealed that he had a mastoid operation. Guess who had a mastoid operation when she was 6 years old? Your mother did. She has a hole in her head, which is why she married me in 1959. Oswald had a mastoid. It was what you did in the free antibody area to control a mastoid infection, which is right behind the ear. And so he had one, and there was no way that could have been faked by the Russians because they didn't do mastoid operations. So that really was Oswald, not somebody else. Forward. But he lays a paper trail connecting himself to the pro-Castro Cubans, invents a chapter in New Orleans in which he becomes the president of a chapter with only one member, but he's got a president here. He's got a president, he's got a side here, but a member, a fellow member, named, I can't think of his name now. But that was the name under which he ordered the rifle. It's an alias with a card picture on it.
Heidel.
Alex Heidel, yeah. And Heidel was the name under which he ordered the rifle from this mail order outfit that he used to kill Kennedy. Forward. Now, this leads us to the famous JFK movie, and this is the Jolly Green Giant, as he called the district attorney of the city of New Orleans. What's his name? Help me.
Garrison.
Garrison, yeah, James Garrison. Big Jim Garrison. He tried to track down Oswald's, because there were two cities which were hotbeds of the war against Castro. One was New Orleans, the other was Miami. Forward. Keep going.
Uh-oh, it stopped.
Okay. All right, so that one stops there.
Okay.
That's part of antique projection equipment. So if it fails in the middle of a lecture, it's okay, I'm about done anyway. It's 4 o'clock. So that was where the only prosecution that ever happened in this case was in New Orleans, and it was basically the purpose of the movie JFK. And it involved a claque of pro-Castro people. It's back on. There we go. We got that.
You're in the front of it.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, okay. It's an old theory when all else fails, get a hammer and whack it. You know. This is the guy that was prosecuted, played by the actor Tommy Lee Jones in the JFK movie. Right. Now, it was a homosexual underground. So these are people who are easy targets anyway. But you should see the movie. If you haven't seen it, it'll exhibit pretty well what was going forward. It took a jury about an hour to acquit Clay Shaw, who was a CIA agent. That's something that's since come out. And so what was he doing messing around with Oswald? Well, we know he was. That was the bar where Oswald created a stir, the Havana bar. It's not a tough part of New Orleans, so you can see from the look of it when I went there to take that picture. And the Havana bar, he went in with his Marine Corps counterintelligence training. He got a hold of a manual from somewhere in the Marine Corps, classified document, and he got in touch with a man named Carlos Bringuer, who was a leader of the anti-Castro Cubans who were at that point training in the New Orleans area for their own little invasion of Cuba. Long history of that in New Orleans, dating back to the 19th century. Cuban revolutionaries staged attacks out of New Orleans against Cuba in the 19th century. Forward. And of course, he establishes this here. I mean, he gets the gun that kills Kennedy and the pistol that he used to kill Officer Tippit, apparently, and he has radical documents holding up the militant, the socialist workers, you know, proving what a lefty he is. He gets a picture taken. Well, you know the long history of that. People went to great trouble trying to prove it was a fake. Well, it wasn't a fake. It was really Oswald. Forward. Why was he doing it? More important question is that. And that's why finally there were so many questions that came up that during the House Special Committee on Assassinations, they did exhume Oswald's body. Forward. Keep going. There's the final assassination report. This is the end of the lecture right here. That seems to say, now, but what did it use all these hearsay evidences that came up in the long Warren Commission, all these thousands of pages of testimony? What have people have said ever since I saw the gunman on the grassy knoll? Just hearsay? No, what did they use? Acoustical evidence, hard stuff. Forward. there was a motorcycle in that motorcade right behind the cars. And in that motorcycle, there was a Channel 4 of the Dallas Police radio channel. There were only 4 of them those days. The mic on the motorcycle was stuck in the on position. And it left a continuous tape of this motorcycle following right behind the motorcade that Kennedy was in, of the sounds of Dealey Plaza. And forward. The sound seemed to show not 3 gunshots, but 4. Okay, where did and then the acoustical area? By the way, the company Ashkenazi and Weiss is a company that does contract work for the U.S. Navy, developing sound systems for submarines, underwater detection. They were brought in by the House Special Committee and put this audio tape under close analysis, and they contended that there was a 96% probability the 4 sounds they heard on that tape were gunshots. And so it was on the basis of the acoustical evidence. By the way, they tested. They tested by putting microphones all around the sound sources and testing the graphic patterns of sounds in Dealey Plaza to get what's called an audio print. And then they could trace back from the sounds where they originated. 3 of them came from forward. These are the kinds of things, the waveforming of gunshot. Now this is, world-class experts being employed by the House Special Committee. Forward. And 3 of the shots did come within probability radiuses from the 6-4 window. Somebody did shoot it. Kennedy from that window. Where the other one come from? Forward. Grassy. And that's why, late in life, Lyndon Johnson said in public, and then quoted, what? He said, when I took office, I discovered that we were running our own little murder incorporated in the Caribbean. Assassination plots against Castro. What he's referring to. Yeah. And he said, that's the reason, he said, I've always thought that Oswald was involved. Perhaps he even pulled a trigger. But I've never been convinced he acted entirely alone. And I think that's where pretty much everybody still is on this issue. Oswald was involved. He may have been a patsy, as he claimed he was. I'm just a patsy, he said in the Dallas police station. But that's what this scientific evidence seemed to show. What's come of it? Nothing. Suppose you read something in the Warren Commission that you thought didn't look right. You write a letter to the Warren Commission, and this happened, millions of them. What happened to the letter? They went in a dead file and were given to the National Archives, where they still are. Because the Warren Commission did its work, made its report, and went out of business, and there was nobody to complain to. Nobody to complain to. It requires the Attorney General of the United States to take up the cause at that point. And when no Attorney General ever did, well, the House got into it in the mid-70s after the Church Committee's revelations of foreign assassination plots. Subsequently got a law signed, which we outlawed assassination plots, but I think we're still doing it. It's just a law, nothing you need to worry about. And so what happened was nothing has ever been done. The National Science Foundation went over and did the same work that Ashkenazi and Weiss, these acoustical engineers, did. But I don't know that they had the same kind of expertise that they did, which they said with 96% probability. Those were gunshots on that audio tape. They didn't agree. But then again, I've never seen an official report of their work, the National Science Foundation work. So we're pretty much stuck where we started, aren't we? Forward. Questions for half a century? We're still going to be having questions. We're still questioning what happened in Lincoln's case. There's still mysteries about that. Still are. I mean, that trial that those Army officers waged there, it's kind of a kangaroo court. It really was. So maybe Warren Commission can't be believed, but then again, you can't be entirely sure they didn't get it right by accident. Maybe they got it right, despite everything. Sometimes that's where I kind of come down. I think they maybe did get it right, but I can't be sure. And we're not sure, and none of us ever will be. And I got a feeling it's because of something else extraneous. If only Lincoln had lived, do you think it would have turned out as badly as it did for Andrew Johnson? I don't. If Kennedy had lived, do you think it would have turned out as bad as it did with practically everybody who's followed him? We hope not. Because he was the first guy I ever voted for. I was 26 years old when he was assassinated. I got to vote for him in 1960, enthusiastically, I might add. Elaine and I were married by then, and we voted for John F. Kennedy. And we always thought, as I was in the military the whole time, I was in for 5.5 years of active duty, 5 years, 3 months, and 14 days. But who was counting? Had her with me, so it was peacetime. Life was great. Got a little girl to come back from Japan with, here she sits. Life was good. And yet we always had she's not Japanese. She doesn't. Just born in Japan. Like John McCain was born in the Canal Zone, in a military facility. And so we have this feeling that if only Kennedy had lived, if only he'd lived, or got a nice quitting slide somewhere here, I don't know where it is. Things might have turned out better. It's the whole legend of the Lost Prince. Of Camelot. That's a word that's all identified with the Kennedy administration, isn't it? A perfect time in the past, if it wasn't exactly perfect, then it had the potential to be so much better than anything that came afterward. Mostly what Kennedy did as president was not make critical mistakes. He didn't blow up the world after all. He didn't get us in Vietnam. That was left to his successor. Although I know in extenuation, the clowns that got us into Vietnam, the clowns that got us into Vietnam, were all Kennedy people. But Kennedy never made those decisions like Johnson did. Forward. That's where Lee Bowers is. I can go on for hours on this stuff. Forward. Give me a quitting place. Yes. Let's put the bones. What about the bones? One of the things the House Committee on Assassination did was kind of finally locate who these people were. There were people arrested that day in the railroad yard, right? That's not an auto underpass, that's a railroad overpass going down there. And these guys were arrested. Forward. And they're referred to as the Dealey Plaza bombs. Forward. And there's something suspicious about them. What is it? The bums aren't. They don't have recent barber haircuts. These guys all do. Who were these guys? We don't know. House Committee actually thought they did establish who they were. They really were just bums. Cops investigated and let them go. They walked out of the station that same day they were arrested. But there's no record of the arrest, no record of the questioning. We don't know what they knew or didn't know. But they apparently were just what they seemed to be. They said. Forward. This is where they were found back there at the beginning of the line drawing. And have you ever seen the bump? Oswald's got, Oliver Stone has, he treats with this in the movie. Watch the movie again. It's pretty good. You don't have to believe it's true. It's a good yarn. Forward. Is that the end of it?
That's the end.
See, and I have another tray of slides still to go, and I'm going to spare you that. Because our time is up.
Take questions.
I'll take questions, sure. Sure.
I like what I caught about a week or so ago about Bob Sheeper.
Yeah.
That was the closest that anybody came close that belonged to the news organizations, the media, was Bob Sheeper taking Oswald's mother to the police station. And as you noted, if Zapruder wasn't there, there would have been nothing. There was no media out there. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Or was it?
Yeah, you may be right. First hand up, Rebecca, Diane.
Yeah, I'm hoping you'll cover at least 2 more things.
Oh, but it's at 4:15. We're missing the last of the Bears game.
Bears game's over. I think they lost.
Oh, I don't want to hear it.
So, well,